Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker, and in this video I'm delighted to be joined by someone who has dedicated many years to understanding the phenomenon of cultic abuse. Dr Michelle Haslam is a clinical psychologist with more than 8 years experience of working with people with complex attachment-related difficulties and addictions. In addition, Dr. Haslam was once a resident of the Nagarjuna, I'm going to get schooled on the pronunciation here, Nagarjuna Kadampa Meditation Centre, and has been outspoken about the centre since March 2019. Dr. Haslam, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
So, did I butcher the pronunciation there of the the place where you were a resident?
They can be quite tricky to pronounce, yeah. It's the Nagarjuna Centre, which, just so people know, it's part of a group called the New Kadampa Tradition, who have centres throughout the UK and quite a few countries throughout the world.
Interesting. And would it be fair to say that your experience with this group was, number one, negative, and number two, has informed the approach that you've taken in your professional career?
Yes and no. So I wouldn't say that I have dedicated many years of my life to the cultic abuse related stuff, because I only became involved in 2015, and I left in I moved into a centre in 2016 and left in 2018. And I'd say it's only really in the last 2 years that I've started to spend quite a bit of time understanding the cultic dynamics in Buddhist groups, or groups that call themselves Buddhist. And, you know, compared to people who left their groups years ago and have read loads of exit literature, you know, I would say I feel kind of, fairly new to that. And I don't actually work with former members therapeutically. I like to produce materials such as, these chats, and I've got some of my own videos and writing, but I don't work directly with former members of groups. It's a little bit too early for me, and but I may do in the future, but I think there can be lots of potential difficulties there. But I mean, what I've learned from my experience certainly helps me to understand how abuse of power and institutional abuse affects people, even those who don't necessarily identify with having been in a cult. So, yeah.
So you joined the centre when you were already a clinical psychologist, would that be accurate?
So that's actually quite surprising for a lot of people. Most people study psychology after they've been involved. So I kind of got drawn into Western Buddhist groups through my profession, in a way, because my profession peddles mindfulness quite strongly. And then the mindfulness movement was huge back then. I mean, it still is, but there was little awareness of the potential risks and adverse effects and contraindications back then. And what kind of happened is you would get recommended to go check out a local class, and that local class would be in a Buddhist centre. And there were no warnings given about, you know, what these groups might be like. And then you're kind of given this argument that, well, you know, you shouldn't just practice mindfulness because, you know, a sociopath could be mindful and be great at staying in the here and now, but you should really study, you know, the ethics and the roots of mindfulness in Buddhism to make sure that you're a compassionate person. So I kind of got drawn in that way. And plus, you know, Buddhist paraphernalia and memes are like really popular in social media. and it's kind of seen in the West as the sort of one safe religion, or some people don't even view it as a religion. You know, they view it as a science of the mind. So I kind of got it means that our barriers are down, and we don't spot warning signs very easily in the way that we might with another religion.
And I notice on your website it says that you were a resident. Were you literally living in this place?
Yeah, I was. So I have a sort of background of having lived in some intentional communities, and I was keen to live in a community where there was an intentional aspect, and shared meals and things like this. And so when I heard that you could live in Buddhist centres, I just thought that sounded great. And I didn't know anything about the institutional abuse, because, as you know, whistleblowers there's huge attempts to silence them. So it's very difficult to know what has gone on before you. I was struggling at the time, so I was quite socially isolated, and I was a bit depressed, and so I really just wanted a sense of community, sense of structure, and you had to go to one class a week in line with their doctrine in order to live there, and you had to give like 5 or so hours of your time. But I worked full time, so I didn't dedicate all of my life to volunteering for them, and I had things that I was doing outside of the place, whereas some people actually give up their jobs, they volunteer for these centres in exchange for accommodation and food, and there's benefit fraud that goes on as well, in terms of people claiming benefits to funnel money into the organisation. So yeah, I wasn't a true believer. I was never interested in following the path of the guru. In fact, the photos of the guru used to kind of creep me out a bit. But they water all of that down into the kind of meditation and mindfulness movement. So the beginner level classes, they don't talk about, dedicating your life to the guru or achieving enlightenment, and all. They kind of water it down to being about tools for dealing with your mental health. So it's only when you have been around a while that the warning signs become clearer.
At which point there's the sunk cost fallacy, isn't there? I've invested all of this time. This looks a little bit odd, but because I've already committed so much, I may as well see things through, Did you think that factors in?
For sure. I mean, I was partially indoctrinated, so I wouldn't say I was fully indoctrinated, but I had somehow taken on more of the belief system than I had intended, just through being around the teachings so much, and they were actually written on the walls. So I never believed in enlightenment as a permanent state that could be achieved, and I never believed in past and future lives. But they kind of tell you that, you don't need to believe that yet. You will one day, but it's okay that you don't believe that now. But it is affecting you more than you realise. And I'd become quite invested in the community. So I did find it very difficult to leave. Or the thought of leaving was quite scary. But as soon as I left, I realised that actually all of this talk about ethics and compassion doesn't make people more compassionate, because I found members of the general public to be a lot more warm and a lot more authentic and curious, and so it became a lot, but you know what it's like, it happens so slowly. And it was in the middle of nowhere in Northamptonshire, so in the middle of the countryside, and I was a bit isolated. So even though I worked full time and I was reading a variety of books and materials, that I wasn't just reading the books produced by the group. It's incredible how you can be so influenced.
You mentioned that you were terrified or scared at the idea of leaving. Was there anything specific that was making you scared?
Well, there's quite a lot, really. Partly, I'd got used to living with lots of people, and we had shared meals, and I didn't know many other people in the area. So partly it was kind of a fear of loneliness that was perhaps coming from my own stuff. But there's also, as I'm sure you've experienced too, many beliefs about leaving the group being a sign that you are spiritually inadequate, you've lost patience in your spiritual path, you're going to become more deluded, more mundane, you're going to be tempted by worldly enjoyments. And it's bizarre how I never held this belief system towards other people. You know, I was working as a psychologist. I would never say that to any of my clients, and I didn't even think this about them, but yet the belief system had influenced me. So yeah, they kind of make you feel like if you leave, you're going to be a bad person, you're going to be more ordinary. And so and perhaps if you've become engulfed in the group, then you may have burnt bridges with people. I did still keep ties to people outside the group, but I had sort of somewhat distanced myself from them. And it's quite hard to say, do you know what, actually, I think I've been in a cult, and I'm really sorry that I haven't made much effort with our friendship, you know, all of a sudden. So all those things did influence me, even though I was only involved for 18 months and I didn't sacrifice much. And I really feel for the people who've given up their entire lives, given up their careers, and dedicated their whole being to the group, because to the cognitive dissonance that you have to work through to get to the point where you say, actually, what I've been doing is actually quite damaging, and the group have been lying and deceiving people. For some people, the economic abuse as well means that they have nothing. So a lot of people actually email me because it's tricky. I don't know whether to allow people to email me, because I do get a lot of strange stuff sent to me, but a lot of people say that it's economic abuse and financial difficulties that keep them staying longer, even though they have acknowledged that they need to leave. They haven't got the resources yet in order to do that.
So I'm still kind of processing the fact that this is all so recent. So,
Sure,
you know, 2016 to 2018, and you join as someone with a background in clinical psychology. Do you think that it's possible to be very well versed in clinical psychology, but somewhat naive to cults and the way cults work?
Absolutely, yeah. And it does surprise people. I've only had a few. I used to get a few sort of YouTube comments of people going, lol, a psychologist that got drawn into a cult. But they would quickly delete them when they realised that that's not really how it works. But yeah, I mean, I would say that I was in a particularly vulnerable position at the time. As I say, I was quite depressed, and some of the teachings fed into that. So I can explain a little bit about that later, maybe. But and I just wanted to live in a community at that time. I didn't look for testimonies. I had no idea that the teachings could be used to manipulate you. We learned a little bit of social psychology in our undergraduate degree, but just in extreme situations like Milgram's experiments, knowing that people can be coerced to shock people, I knew that kind of thing, but cultic dynamics not so much. And I've learned so much about that, and I'm still seeing on Twitter and on Facebook, almost on a daily basis, I'm having to contact therapists, psychiatrists to say who are recommending the NKT for mental health problems. And I'm having to say, look, please research this further, because this intersection between Buddhism and mental health, it's become socially acceptable and in social media to promote Buddhism for good mental health. And if you're a therapist or a psychologist or any kind of mental health professional, the group will love bomb you, if you want to use that term, more than normal, because they want you to give them credibility. So it's actually a real concern, and it's still happening now. And actually during the pandemic, it's got even worse, because they can say, well, look, mental health services are recommending that you practice meditation at the moment, and look, we'll make this bit free for you, because we're so generous and kind. And so that gives them more chance to recruit people than usual, because people are desperate. But the problem is that their difficulties are being pathologized, because actually, it's healthy and normal to be anxious during a period of uncertainty, to be angry at some of the oppression and the lies that you're being fed. And unfortunately, if that is pathologized as meaning that you have bad mental health, then that gives the meditation-based groups more of a chance to recruit, because they can say, struggling with your mental health, we've got the answer. So yeah, it's still a widespread problem in the UK. There are still GP surgeries with links to the group saying, go check out this group. So it's really something that we need to raise awareness of. And most of the time people don't believe you. When I try and explain how the senior members try to ruin people's lives if they speak out, and how they actually don't practice meditation according to Western definitions, they indoctrinate people and encourage them to practice thought stopping and thought control. And I think it's actually guided self-hypnosis. I don't think it is meditation. But to try and explain that to people when there's nobody else who has said that, they just don't believe me. They just say, well, it's not on a list of dangerous groups that exists anywhere. And until that happens, we're just going to keep promoting them, because, yeah, they mental health services as well, they can become, if they can recommend something outside of the mental health service, that reduces the burden on the service. So they're just happy usually to hear that somebody is accessing something they're finding helpful at first, and they don't think to check out the potential dangers or to warn people, because they're just happy that the person is practicing something that they can do elsewhere or at home by themselves, because that reduces the burden on the therapist.
Presumably these centres are registered charities.
Yeah, and again, of course, that means that people cannot understand that it could be a dangerous cult. And it's very difficult to, because each individual centre is registered with a different charity number, then it's very difficult to get any action taken. And all of the ways in which they threaten people. They use fake identities so that you can't prove it's them. You know it's them, but you can't prove it. And so there's just not enough evidence. Plus, a lot of people who've been involved, they go completely quiet when they leave because they know they've already been threatened and they don't feel safe. So there aren't as many testimonies as there could be. So, and I've learned since then that actually the more dangerous the group is, the fewer testimonies there are.
So obviously, hearing you talk about this group, I'm thinking of lots of connections between your experience and my experience with Jehovah's Witnesses. It's one thing that kind of really stood out was when you were talking about how when you go to the first few meetings, everything seems very benign and very generic, and this is how we do meditation and that kind of thing. And only later on, again, once you've invested quite a lot of time and energy and emotion into it, do you start to see what could be perceived under any other circumstances as red flags. It's similar with Jehovah's Witnesses. They tend to get you with the pictures of paradise and people petting pandas and wild animals in fields, right, and saying, wouldn't you like to live in a world like this that's free from wickedness? And of course, that's what everyone wants. It's only once you've invested a lot of time and many hours of studying that it fully dawns on you that this would come at the expense of a global genocide where everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness is annihilated. So again, it's fascinating to see the commonalities. If I'm kind of summarizing the most abusive elements of Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm going to talk about shunning. I'm going to talk about the cover-up of child sex abuse. I'm going to talk about the way members are persuaded to refuse blood transfusions, even if it means them dying. I'm going to talk about the way higher education is dissuaded. And I'm going to talk about the problems with domestic violence and how women are put in dangerous situations. What would be your list of most kind of egregious issues with this particular group?
Yeah, well, it's actually very common. The Me Too movement has only really hit Buddhism in the last few years, and it is there are more and more testimonies of sexual abuse, and so obviously that is a huge concern because of the way that crazy wisdom teachings are used to suggest that the actions of your teacher, they could be some kind of spiritual lesson. And although conventionally they may appear to be abuse, actually spiritually, perhaps you need to suffer more to develop spiritually, or perhaps it's a teaching. And so this crazy wisdom idea is a problem across Buddhist groups. And the teachings are abuse enabling. So
we can see how any narcissist could take full advantage of that sort of thinking.
Exactly. And I never believed in enlightened beings. So I never believed that my teachers were enlightened beings, but the teachings are abuse enabling in other ways as well. So for example, the idea that abuse is created by your mind, and it's like your projection, and it didn't really happen, basically, or it's your karma. So these are the most dangerous teachings. So karma teachings are used to suggest that if you're being abused in this life, it's because you were abusive yourself in a previous life, and this is just the payback, basically. So you can never speak up and say, I think this person's abusive, because you'll just be told that it's all in your mind, and it's because you need to purify the delusions in your mind, or that it's because of something you did in the past. And then when all of that kind of victim blaming has failed, they'll then just resort to nihilism and just say things like, well, nothing matters, or people don't really exist. So yeah, it's basically impossible to report abuse. And so I suspect there has been a lot of cover-ups of including child sexual abuse due to this. So that is obviously the biggest worry, that people don't know this because they just think that Buddhism is all about peace and love. But actually the teachings are used to get you to doubt your own perception and your own intuition and your own reality. This idea that you create your reality with your own mind it gives you the illusion of control at first, because you start to think, oh, well, if I can just control my mind more to be more positive, which is a little bit like some psychological therapies, you know, it's not that far-fetched. It's not that big a step from cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, which would suggest, well, if you have negative thoughts, can you look for more balanced alternatives? You know, it's not a massive step on from that to just say, well, if I can just learn to think positively all the time, then I'll never have a negative thought. But if you're in an abusive situation, you need to be able to have negative thoughts about an abusive person to keep you safe. And so, yeah, this is something that people, there's a lot of toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing of thoughts and feelings that actually keep you safe.
Okay.
So this is the main things, and also the dissociation involved in order to not feel emotional pain or to experience, you know, thoughts that we could call negative. You would have to be seriously dissociated, and you know, to be non-reactive is the sort of goal of a lot of people's practice. So they would call it equanimity, which basically means responding in the same way to all phenomena. This is just dissociation. You know, to dissociate from being in a war zone so that you remain calm. You know, this actually over time means that you're becoming more sociopathic, because you don't respond to necessarily to bad things happening to other people. You become more of a bystander to abuse. There are lots of ways in which these teachings are damaging, but even mental health professionals may not know this, because, you know, if you appear more non-reactive, you appear calmer. If you are more still, you are more compliant. You're less intense. You know,
you're not going to get an ASBO for antisocial behavior or anything like that. Yeah,
exactly. But you could be really damaging yourself, but you're unlikely to present in distress for a while, at least, to mental health services or to friends and family, because you've developed this entirely internal locus of control. Like, I'm just working on this in a self-sufficient way in my own mind to become, you know, in control of my reality. So, yeah, there are many ways in which these teachings are damaging, and this is common throughout Buddhist groups. But as I say, because it's been watered down into the mindfulness movement, and actually lots of researchers who've been studying the positive effects of meditation are indoctrinated by the teachings of their particular guru, and they have a wish to spread the Dharma. And so there's a lot of confirmation bias in the research, and only about 25% of studies on mindfulness and meditation have actually asked people about adverse effects. So a lot of people are experiencing dissociation, derealization, anxiety through these practices. There's not enough evidence of this yet.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, there's a lot of not just abuse, but also capacity for abuse in the sort of manipulative, kind of controlling way, and the way that people are kind of trained to be, as you say, dissociated from lots of issues. I'm also kind of very mindful of the fact that you are describing a very insular movement. You mentioned that you'd kind of detached somewhat from your friends on the outside while you were inside. And when you think about your kind of stereotypical cult scenario, someone goes off to a compound and their friends and relatives don't hear from them again. So do you think that possibly the insularity, and you could call it shunning element of the group, poses problems?
Yeah, for sure. It's not so obvious at first, but in the texts that are a little bit more advanced, it starts to say that, you know, you should minimize time with people who cause you to develop more delusions, which a delusion just means a thought that's not in line with the teachings, right? And that you should, protect yourself from these influences, because these people they have mundane states of mind, and it's not written down that if you turn away from the guru Kelsang Gyatso that you'll be reborn in a hell realm, but it is written that if you turn away from your spiritual guide, you will be reborn in a hell realm for 1,000 aeons or something. And obviously, if you're there, you've chosen him as your spiritual guide. So that's what that means to you. I never did that. But as soon as I saw this written in a text, I thought, well, that's just a trauma bond. You're threatening me with rebirth in hell, basically, if I walk away, psychologically, not just physically from the building, but psychologically from the teachings. So, it's not written down. I think I saw a clip of a video of yours where it was actually written in the text what they believe about apostates. It's not written like that as far as I know. I haven't read all of the books of Kelsang Gyatso, but it's not written down like that as far as I know, that that people who've left will cause you to become more deluded or corrupt. But that's kind of the way that people spoke about it. And then there's the threat of rebirth in a hell realm. And if you have taken on the belief system, that would likely frighten you. So, yes, I do think that it is very damaging. And also because the group it's narcissistic, it's just part of the emotional contagion that you all start to think that you're on a path, and therefore people who are not practicing that path, they're sort of, lesser people. So that does influence you to, and also you lose conversation skills, like you lose social skills of how to interact with people who don't have the same beliefs as you. So all of that, I would say, it does significantly damage people's relationships.
Absolutely. And I feel I've learned a new phrase. Trauma bond, is that a psychological phrase?
Yeah, I guess so. So when a person is abusive, you would expect that you would be less likely to become bonded to them over time. But actually we find the opposite, that if you're in an abusive relationship, it's more addictive, it's harder to leave, especially if there are periods when the person is nice and then periods when they're abusive. It's very unpredictable, and the periods of them being kind are very reinforcing. So yeah, this is a real problem. I would say a lot of the former members that I've spoken to since leaving, they almost have like a Stockholm syndrome, where they really feel very bonded to the guru, even when they've seen evidence that actually they've been lied to. He never completed his Geshe exams. He was expelled from his monastery. he took over the first centre that the New Kadampa tradition have through blackmail. There's plenty of evidence that he's not a perfect enlightened being, and also the NKT keep information about his whereabouts from the members. So former members believe that he's either been dead quite a few years, or he has a dementia, which would mean that he can't be seen in public, because apparently an enlightened being is not supposed to develop a degenerative disease. So they can't let people see him, because that would mean that the whole thing would fall apart. So they just sort of elevate him to this position of omniscient being and it's almost elevated him even more through the fact that they keep his whereabouts a mystery, because that's more mysterious. So yeah, the members that used to know, that met him in person and received teachings from him in person, and then they just experienced this slow abandonment, but with all this mystery surrounding it. They have this sense that their spiritual father, their spiritual guru, is still somehow looking over them and protecting them, but actually they are slowly being abandoned and deceived. And some of them have, when they discover that they've been lied to, they develop a really severe betrayal trauma, because his entourage will just claim that, he can't come in person because he's at risk of assassination. We can't secure the perimeter of the premises enough for him to come, which also is like a fear induction by suggesting through paranoia that, he's so important, he's such a big deal that people will try and kill him. So that's why we need to protect him, because our guru is so special. So all of this, really, that won't so much affect the younger members who got drawn in through the mindfulness and meditation movements, maybe because they won't have received teachings from him, and they won't have so much infatuation with him. But the trauma bonds can be really awful.
And in a JW context, would it be accurate to say that the fear of annihilation at Armageddon for any who aren't witnesses or who leave Jehovah's Witnesses, might that be described as a trauma bond?
Yeah, I mean, there's not so much about annihilation, but there's more about how we need to lead all living beings to enlightenment. So there's not so much kind of end of days about it. It's more about, well, I suppose it is, because there's the idea that if we don't lead all living beings to enlightenment by spreading the doctrine, then we're all going to degenerate and experience eternal suffering. So it is like that, yeah.
And again, without wishing to overly laden the conversation with comparisons, when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses and the way former members are treated, obviously we've mentioned the fact that they are described as being crazy, mentally diseased, corrupted in mind, and obviously there is shunning. So if they have any believing friends or relatives, those are to cut themselves off from those individuals. I'm interested to know, you don't have to go into too much detail, but it would just be interesting to see what punishment has been visited on you, not just for leaving the group, but for being a whistleblower against it. Yeah.
So I have probably received the most extensive attempts at character assassination because of my qualifications. So the former whistleblowers, they had less credibility, but because I'm a psychologist, the attempts that they've made on me were larger. So first of all, I started making a YouTube channel. They set up automatic programs to dislike my videos, which is quite amusing.
I didn't know that was even a thing.
I know, right?
Wow. Okay.
The video went live, it would get
I hope
forwarded.
Watchtower isn't watching this. They'll be getting ideas at this point. Go on.
Yeah. I mean, that one kind of amused me, but it still showed the desperation that they had to silence me. Not that disliking would have that effect, but then I started to receive threats in the comment section that would disappear, saying I need to have cameras outside my house. Then I tried to protect myself because I wrote in my writing, like, any abuse or threats, I will publish them online. So they didn't the senior members didn't send me direct threats. But what they did was, the day after a written report that I wrote, breaking down the teachings and how they indoctrinate people, the day after that went viral, they created a fake identity and emailed my workplace, trying to make out that I'm mentally unstable. So the cult classic, character assassinated as mentally unstable. Unfortunately, this triggered me so much that I shared the email on social media to expose them, which actually led me to lose my job, because you're not supposed to share work-related emails on social media, even though it was about me and not about a client or anything. I was just so in the abuse cycle at the time that I wanted to show people what they were doing. And it came like not even 24 hours after I'd released my written material. And it was so predictable, that I wanted to show people that, as we predicted, they're trying to ruin my life, Then what happened was they then bought the URL of my name, drmichellehaslam.com, and they wrote an entire website about my childhood trauma, about how I lost my father, and that's why I'm traumatized and has nothing to do with them. They wrote that I got fired for gross misconduct. They tried to make out that I was a lawbreaker in any way that they could to make me seem unethical and like a fake, not a real psychologist. But they also tore apart my report at the same time as pretending to be a psychologist who was deeply concerned for my mental state, which obviously to an outsider it becomes very clear that it's a character assassination website. So they even found out the name of my dead father. They read my PhD thesis. They really stalked the hell out of me to gather evidence against me. Because I'd been making a YouTube channel, they'd had time to do that. And I'd kind of given them some ammunition, thinking that, well, if they use it to try and make out that I just had a traumatic childhood, then we'll see that they have no empathy. And then that will just bolster what I'm saying. But it was still very disturbing, even though somewhat predictable, to actually experience it and to know that they would do whatever they could to control the narrative for people who remain. And there are actually some people current members that did serve to control the narrative for them, because obviously it minimizes cognitive dissonance. If they can just say, she's an angry, mentally disturbed, fake psychologist, then they can carry on doing what they're doing. And even people that knew me personally, who I got on reasonably well with when I lived there, they now troll me, saying I'm mentally disturbed. And it makes me laugh, because I think, well, if you'd read every single testimony and read all the emails that I get of horrifying stories of decades of institutional abuse that people have been through at the hands of this group, and then received death threats, legal threats, threats of harm to reputation, then you would be disturbed too. Like, it's healthy that I'm disturbed. Like, my dreams are, I dream of psychopaths. And I dream of all sorts of horrid things. But that's actually a healthy, okay, it's unpleasant, but that, when you've learned about how spiritual psychopaths will try to destroy people's lives whilst sitting on the throne talking about compassion, and they sit on the throne and talk about non-attachment to reputation, and yet they destroy other people's reputations to protect their reputation.
Yeah.
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 The hypocrisy is disturbing, and you know, sometimes they harass me saying I'm angry, you know, because anger is seen as less spiritual. So for them to see me angry, they don't believe in righteous anger. So I've been, but it kind of helps in a way, because when they've called you so many different things, they actually start to contradict, and then it becomes more meaningless to you. Like, I've been called a spy, a Mara, which is like a spirit that's designed to sort of tempt you back into the world of gluttonous enjoyments, you know, take you away from your spiritual path.
Which is the effect you're having on all my viewers at the moment. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. And then, you know, to call me mentally disturbed at the same time, you know, when it starts to contradict, that becomes helpful in a way. But it still sometimes gets me, you know, to see the kind of misogynistic hatred that I'll get on my YouTube channel. It's like people don't think that I would read it. It's like they think they're talking to another audience, and it's like, I own this channel and I will reply to you abusing me on this channel. And it's when I actually respond, people seem a bit surprised. So
well, it's that is one big difference, and I'm actually quite grateful of the fact that the organization itself doesn't come after you per se. I mean, I have had threatening, at least one threatening lawyer's letter from their legal department, but apart from that, it's been fairly plain sailing. If anything, the biggest problem I have is fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who don't feel as though I'm representing their viewpoint. But thinking kind of as we kind of wrap up, I'm wondering whether there are any take-home lessons here. If we were living in an ideal world, how would society and governments be dealing with manipulative, exploitative groups like NKT and Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get any support, to get people to believe you, to say, you know, actually, this is like the Scientology of Buddhism.
Well, I was going to say Scientology. It sounds exactly like it, with the fair gaming and everything.
It is.
Yeah.
They do practice fair game. Yeah. They will go to great lengths to destroy you. As I say, they did up the game for me because of my qualifications, but and unfortunately, it has served to instill more fear in other people about coming forward. So that's an unfortunate side effect. But it's really difficult because particularly with Buddhism and the intersection with mental health, as I say, to get anyone to be skeptical, although there is more and more, you know, material being produced that tells people about the problems, but they churn out so much on their social media, and they have so many websites that the testimonies appear quite far down in search results. So I mean, in terms of what can be done, I mean, I try and spread the word as much as I can inside the national health system. I've emailed everyone I possibly can, you know, and I will report therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists who promote the group. But really, unless the Charity Commission investigates, then which is very hard to get that to happen, then there's just, whilst groups remain charities, I mean, I think Scientology is still a charity. So
I don't know whether Scientology is. I can tell you Watchtower definitely is a charity. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check that about Scientology. I did think that it was. So, yeah, I mean, very difficult to fight cults. It's as soon as I write anything anywhere, it will get deleted. If it's possible to delete a comment, an NKT person will come along and get my comment deleted instantly. They don't allow comments on a lot of their materials. So yeah, I mean, I think I'll try and spread the awareness sort of with mental health professionals, saying, look, you cannot recommend any kind of spiritual or religious teacher that you haven't checked out. Even if you have checked them out and you happen to have a great experience, you cannot say that they're a safe person. You know, there's no regulations. Anyone can set themselves up to be a spiritual teacher. There's no regulation system, you know. So we really should not be recommending. This is where I think I can perhaps do a bit more, is raising the awareness of how, you know, we should not be recommending religion for mental health, and you know, including groups that say they teach mindfulness, because just because they say that they teach mindfulness doesn't mean that they actually do. It can be thought stopping, and they can have really strong beliefs about negative emotions being impure or bad or less spiritual. So this is what we need to sort of spread awareness with. But I don't hold out hope anymore for the Charity Commission doing anything, because unless they receive enough complaints about each individual centre, I think it will just carry on, unfortunately.
My personal opinion is that the Charity Commission just aren't tooled correctly to deal with abusive cult-like groups, to be honest. They seem to... I don't think they have the legislative clout to properly identify groups that are abusing charitable status that also happen to be religions. And I think they're also very scared of being perceived to be persecuting religions. So... Yes.
And so it becomes, you get into discussions about belief, you know, and I try and bring it back to, you know, it's the abuse that's the concern. You know, I get criticised because I don't understand scripture enough, you know, because I didn't go down the route of trying to understand Buddhism fully when I left. I got involved in another group that was equally dodgy called Triratna, whose leader is a known sexual abuser. He died a couple of years ago now. And so after that, I was just like, do you know what? I don't trust any of this. So I didn't go down the route of studying more scripture to find out what I should have been learning if it was sort of proper Buddhism and not so kind of not personality cult. So people criticize me and they just say, you know, well, you don't fully understand what Buddhism is, you know, or, this is just someone's belief system. But I'm, you know, more worried about people receiving death threats, and, those teachings being used to gaslight them, to get them to doubt their own perception and their own intuition. But I mainly think that dialogue between former members, videos and things like this are fantastic, because also waiting for mainstream media is very difficult. So I've had several potential big exposes lined up, but they get pulled at the last minute because of libel, because they say, well, if only you speak, we are not protected enough legally. And I have to say, well, but no one else feels safe enough to come forward because they've seen what the group have tried to do to me. So we're not going to get lots of people come forward. And also people are tired, you know, they don't want anything to do with the group anymore. They don't want to speak about it, and they don't want their name associated with the group. So that means then that there's not enough in the news about them. So really, I think dialogue between former members is all we can
we can really do at the moment.
Well, all I can say is that I hugely admire what you're doing. It's hard enough for me to do what I do, but at least I'm doing it with lots of other like-minded ex-Jehovah's Witness colleagues. To plough a lone furrow must be extremely frustrating, but I really do admire your persistence in doing that. So thank you.
No, it's I do have a lot of support. It's just that most of it's in private.
Sure.
So it's, I get, supportive emails and messages. It's just that those people quite rightly feel safer to remain anonymous. And so the trouble is that when I started speaking up, I still had a bit of a martyr complex from inside the group. I wouldn't recommend anybody do that. I didn't protect myself and I didn't understand fair game. I just had this sense of harm coming to people who remain, and that was against my values. And I felt as a psychologist I had to speak up to explain the psychology behind some of the teachings. And I did that when I was desperate, and then I faced the consequences. But it's been a year now since that, and I'm back on my feet and I work, and I feel a lot better, and I'm part of quite a few different support networks. So I'm not completely alone. It can feel very lonely at times. When you get a horrid bit of cyberbullying and nobody's physically with you who understands what that experience is like, it can feel as if you are completely alone with it. But if I reach out to someone who's experienced similar, then I do have support. But thank you anyway.
And you mentioned a YouTube channel. I think there's also a website. So I'll be putting those links, if that's okay, in the description, so that the resources are available for those who want to check out more information. But Dr. Michelle Haslam, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for making yourself available.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me. Lovely chatting to you.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. I thoroughly have. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.